IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. I am Pranay and I have with me Anupam, and today we are going to discuss a problem which we should have discussed a long time back, and that is the pollution all over North India. And we are going to discuss one part of that, which is this idea of CRB, crop residue burning, or in common parlance everyone uses stubble burning. So that has been established as one of the leading causes of this entire pollution thing which happens in Delhi and in other cities. So for now, we'll just talk about this problem and try to see what are the solutions to this, because everyone has talked about the problem, people have tried solutions, they haven't worked. So let's deep dive into that and what economics and public policy can tell us about that. Okay, so Anupam, let's start off with this. Let's discuss the problem first before we come to the solution. So in economic terms, how would you describe this problem of CRB?
Right. So I don't think we should get into the extent of the problem about the haze. I think everyone has a good understanding of it. And I think a picture paints 1,000 words. So people have seen how it looks in Delhi. And it's astonishing and it is horrendous and really frightful. So we'll skip over that bit. We'll just get to how do you characterize the problem and how do you approach a problem such as this in economic terms. So in classic economics, you would call this as a negative externality. An externality is basically when a third party who's not part of the transaction gets affected by a particular transaction. So in the simplest terms, you can always imagine that, if I light up a cigarette smoke here, the transaction is between me and the vendor who sold me that cigarette. And you're the third party who's unwittingly here, but you're also getting affected by the passive smoke. Right? So that's basically an externality on you. So in this sense, it's of course a negative externality. Stubble burning is characterized as a negative externality. There are farmers who burn the stubble and basically that's the transaction. They sell the wheat or paddy and so on to other people. But Delhiites, let's say here, are not part of any part of that transaction. They do not, it's not factored in at all. And yet they're getting massively affected by it. So let's say the cost of air pollution, there's a social cost attached here. So essentially that's the cost of all the negative effects that Delhiites actually face because of this particular thing. That's not factored into any part of the transaction at all. So it's not part of the price of wheat or paddy or any of those things. So that's the basic problem of externality.
Yeah, basically anyone who's taking part in the transaction, let's say who's buying the paddy which is harvested and which is and wheat is planted in place of this, they are the price that they are paying does not take into account the ACs and the air filters that Delhi people have to use because of this externality.
Or the medical expenditure.
Yes.
So basically 1 kg of rice does not actually pay, the price that you're paying does not actually factor into the medical expense of the person in Delhi who has lung problems.
Yes. That's the negative externality. So what's the problem with the negative externality?
The problem with the negative externality is that because the social cost is not actually factored in, there tends to be overproduction or overconsumption of these goods. So then what you would call a socially optimal? So if the entire social cost and social benefits as such were factored in, then you would have a particular socially optimal quantity. Now, because that cost is not really factored in, you tend to have overproduction. In this case, overproduction of this particular aspect. So here, because the entire, let's say, the social cost of all of the, as you said, the AC cost, the air filters cost, and the medical expenses of people in Delhi is not actually factored into the price of rice, then there tends to be a lot more production of rice and a lot more consumption of that rice, which means that the problem will keep getting exacerbated. That's in essence the problem.
Right. And so this is a negative externality, and externalities are market failures in the sense that, as you said, the markets don't do a good job of allocating efficiently in this sense whenever there's a market failure, right? And externality is a classic case of that. So now, given that there's a market failure, what should be done?
the classic response, I think, is whenever there is a market failure, the kind of first jump at this is that the government should intervene and have either a regulation or a tax. So that, I think, is fairly well understood and has been in effect for a lot of things which have an externality. So you have, let's say, a car which pollutes and which occupies road space and, in that sense has an externality. They pay road tax plus, there's some kind of, there's also, tax on petrol because it pollutes and so on. Cigarettes are notorious that in each year's budgets, there's a tax on cigarettes because, again, that's a way to correct the externality in terms that it's actually internalizing the externality. So you assume that cigarettes are causing the X amount of externality. You put a tax which will kind of cover that on a per cigarette basis.
Yeah. So that money might be used possibly it should be used rather, whether it is or not, we don't know. But that extra revenue raise should be used to mitigate some of the negative consequences of that. And the second thing is, because there is a tax levied on this, the demand for that will decrease.
That's the first thing, actually. Yeah. That's the most important thing. Now that the price of the product is in fact reflecting the social cost and social benefit of that product, it naturally tends towards the socially optimal quantity as well. That's the first effect. And then, whatever extra money you raise, you can use it to mitigate some of the problems. This is called a Pigouvian tax, right? This is a classic Pigouvian taxation problem. Now, again, so the second kind of solution in the same vein is regulation. So if you can't tax something, you can go outright and either ban things, or you can put a very hard limit on the quantity, or you can force the mitigation at a much earlier stage on either the producer or the consumer. So you can do some of these things. So a ban of smoking in public places is one of those regulation-based mitigation strategies.
So let's apply these to the current problem that we are discussing, right? So a ban would operate in the sense, in this case, by saying that no farmer in Punjab and Haryana can burn the crop residue from October 15 to November 15 or something like that. So that is a classic case of putting a ban, right? Yeah, it's a severe form of regulation. Regulation can also have several levels. This is like a ban. Okay, then a Pigouvian tax, how would that operate in this?
So you basically put a tax on rice. You can put it on the consumer or at the producer level. It doesn't matter really because the incidence of tax is borne by someone else. You put a tax on rice, which kind of reflects this. So then people will will consume less of rice, and then therefore that affects the demand for rice, and therefore it affects how much of rice is actually produced. The market will tend towards an equilibrium, and the hope is that with a correct level of taxation, which can be calculated, by the way, quite easily, the amount of rice that is produced will actually reduce, and therefore the need for stubble burning will actually reduce. So that is in effect the solution. However, of course, the biggest problem in all of this is the one of jurisdiction. The people who are affected. So this would work if the pollution is actually affecting Punjab and Haryana, and then the Punjab government or Haryana government can enforce this because they have jurisdiction. The problem, however, is that it's the citizens of Delhi who are getting affected. And therefore, it's a concern of Delhi government in some sense, because it's citizens in some way. And the problem exists in Punjab and Haryana, and who have no incentive to correct this mechanism. So Delhi government, basically, the crux of the problem is that Delhi government does not have jurisdiction over farmers in Punjab and Haryana. As against, for example, they have jurisdiction over vehicle owners in Delhi, which is also a contributing factor. And therefore, they have taxed, they have done the other policies to limit vehicle use and so on, right? So at least they have jurisdiction, and they've tried various solutions within Delhi, whereas they have no jurisdiction over farmers in Punjab and Haryana, and therefore that's not possible.
Yeah. So actually both these solutions, the way conceptually what it is saying is that these farmers are doing something evil or something socially unoptimal, and that's why they need to be taxed in one way through ban or whatever. It's conceptually a tax. But there is another solution, right, where you would see it differently, and which is called a Kosian solution. So tell us about that.
The Kosian solution actually approaches the problem in a very different manner. It doesn't really look at the farmers as evil or doing something, but in fact, it says that most of the harm in this way is actually reciprocal in nature. So yes, the farmers are, let's say, burning stubble, and in that way harming Delhi residents. But if Delhi residents in some manner, or Delhi government in some manner stops the farmers from burning the stubble, they're also imposing harm on the farmers, because now they'd have to either employ really expensive machinery to clear the stubble, or they might have to give up on the rabi crop or whatever,
Kharif crop,
and thereby also incur heavy losses. So in that sense, if you stop them from burning the stubble, the farmers will get enormous amount of this thing. So just to really clarify this situation, I want to bring in a parallel situation which has occurred in the world. So this is not very unique to Delhi and Punjab and Haryana. This has equally, let's say, this has gone ahead in Singapore. Right, the haze in Singapore in October is as a result of stubble burning in Indonesia.
Yeah, the palm fields and all
palm
that.
fields, right? It's notorious, and a particular statement by the Indonesian Prime Minister, which got a lot of flack, by the way, but actually reflects this Kosin solution bit. The Indonesian Prime Minister or President, I'm not sure, sorry for that, mentioned that Singapore should not whine and complain about 1 month of haze and pollution because of the stubble burning, but in fact should be extremely grateful to Indonesia for 11 months of clean air.
Great one.
It actually reflects, because there's nothing that stops these guys from stubble burning throughout the 11 months, or throughout the year rather, right? So the fact that they're not doing it throughout the year, Singapore should actually be. So same thing you can apply in this context.
No, that's a great insight. It might seem actually quite trivial, but you can take many of these cases, right? Like the classic case. It is called a Kosin solution because it was a famous paper by Ronald Coase, and he won a Nobel Prize for that. It's a very small paper, The Problem of Social Cost. We'll link it to this episode. It's one of the landmark papers in economics, right? Now, in the Kosin solution, one insight that he brought out was this harm is not one-sided. In fact, it is reciprocal. So he's seeing this in a very zero-sum terms. And the example he uses to describe this is of cattle rearers versus farmers. So if imagine there are two adjoining farms, one on which cattle are raised and one in which you're actually farming. So the cattle might possibly wander into the farms and take away some of the produce. Now, if the farmer wants to prevent that from happening, it is actually harmful to the cattle rearer, because he'll be able to have lesser cattle on their field if they are not able to wander away, right? So it is quite zero-sum terms, which means harms are reciprocal and not just one-sided.
Yes.
So it's a key insight. So the way to solve this is to identify which of this is a more serious harm, and then try to resolve it through bargaining between the two parties. Right?
Exactly.
Am I getting that right?
That's the entire crux of of Kosin solution. That if property rights are well defined, that's the first job of the government. So if property rights are well defined, then you can have a solution which involves bargaining and negotiating between the two parties, such that one party is compensated for the harm that they're not causing, in a sense.
Right? So this is very interesting, because in the first two solutions we said you have to tax the farmers. In this solution we are saying actually you have to pay the farmers.
You have to pay the farmers. So and this is what gets some people, as in it's not easy to digest, because it seems like against the principles of whatever natural justice or intuitive natural justice. I don't even know what natural justice is here, right? Because farmers own their property and they're burning that farm. I mean, they have complete right over whatever they do in that farm, right? But these people are getting affected by it. So in that sense, you would, it's not intuitive, but it makes sense. So now what we are saying is that Delhi residents would pay the farmers in Punjab and Haryana to stop burning the stubble. Right? Compensate them for that. So which means, and that money we can judge by various means, depending on what the actual solution is. Is it not doing one entire crop at all, or is it not growing paddy? Is it, I don't know, removing the stubble in some other way, which takes more time? We don't know, right? But there is a particular solution, and you can find out that cost of that solution, and that cost is what will be paid to the farmers, so that the stubble is not burnt.
I think for that to happen, first you have to establish which is the more serious harm.
Yeah.
First, is it the harm caused by the pollution is the more serious harm, or the harm of by preventing these farmers to not do what they are free to do is the more serious harm? I think in this case it is more clearer with the problems that have happened over the last few years that the more serious harm is to currently prevent this from happening, the air pollution.
Air pollution. I mean, I think in this case, even though we do not have precise numbers and data, but it seems like a fairly well established thing that the amount of money that is spent on expenditure, the amount of loss of productivity, the amount of loss of income because of that, deaths even, respiratory problems, health problems, all of that together, I think is a far bigger harm than, let's say, farmers not being able to grow a particular crop.
In fact, there are numbers to this. I think Shruti Rajgopalan has an article in Mint. We'll again link it to that, and she quotes a study which estimates the total societal cost because of this. Right. Okay, so now given that we have sort of established that this is the more serious harm, how do you go about implementing the Kozian solution?
So traditionally, if there are a few number of players, you can do direct bargaining. So in that two-farm case, which is the classic thing, one farmer would go up to the other farmer, bargain, negotiate, find out what the rate is, and then pay that person. Problem solved. But here you're talking about a disparate set of people, which is basically the every resident of Delhi, and a whole bunch of farmers on the other hand who are located in two separate states. So it becomes extremely difficult for citizens of Delhi to negotiate with the farmers of Punjab and Haryana. So what would happen now is that you would need an intermediary. In essence, and this could be an NGO or private party and so on, but it's again very difficult because they don't have the authority and neither can they claim to represent every citizen in Delhi. The only actual body which can claim to represent people in Delhi is the government of Delhi. So the government of Delhi is in fact here acting like a private agent who is representing the will of the people of Delhi in the most democratic fashion possible. I mean, that's the only thing. So it would now be that the government of Delhi can raise taxes, can do whatever, earn money, raise revenue by this thing, and then use that money in order to pay the farmers in Punjab and Haryana and ask them to not burn any stubble anymore. That would be how the Kozian solution in this particular context would turn out. I mean, you can have lots of other more complicated procedures as well, having a permit for burning, and then those can be traded and so on, but I think that just complicates the matter. In the simplest fashion, it would be that the government of Delhi pays the farmers of Punjab and Haryana and asks them to stop burning stubble.
So in return of them giving up their right to burn this stubble, they are going to get some money, right? So this intuitively is the solution through the Coase theorem. But what are the complications of this then?
There are multiple complications, as you would expect. I mean, if it was this simple, I think it would have already been done. One is the transaction cost. I mean, it has to be the government acting as a mediator. It cannot be some other people, because just getting every single person of Delhi on board, agreeing to pay a particular price to the farmers, it becomes, I mean, the transaction cost would be extremely high and almost impossible. So you would have to bring in a government.
You need to bring a third entity. It might not be government, but government will have the... and because it is a state, it can force people to agree, and the holdouts can then fall in line and all
Precisely.
that.
So some of those problems will this thing, but it essentially means that it's no longer a pure private sector solution. But it doesn't matter. I mean, how you term it doesn't matter as long as the solution is there. But I think the bigger problem is one of compliance. The cost associated with compliance or enforcement. How do you make sure, let's say you pay the farmers a particular sum of money not to burn stubble, how do you ensure that that person stays true? Right? A, you got weak capacity, state capacity, but B, fundamentally the incentives might not be aligned. So I might take the money this time and then burn it next year, burn the entire, my crops again. And then
I might even burn it this year, and I might still take the money and still use it, right?
Yes.
Like it's like paying a stone thrower to money to not throw stones. They might take the money and still throw stones on the army.
Yeah.
Right? Like
the only other kind of solution within this aspect is, basically if you set up a recurring fund. So you're saying that, each year I will pay you X amount for you not to burn. So that by itself, because it's a multiple period game, it acts as probably an incentive for you to comply. However, even that is fraught with problems, as we were discussing yesterday. It could act as an incentive for people to keep increasing that payment. So you'd have, some people who deliberately do a bit of mischief, and then you have to pay that person higher, and then that acts as an incentive for everyone else to follow suit and do mischief, and basically that entire system breaks down quite easily. So this could be the problem.
Yeah, so basically you can't tie that refund or the payment that you're getting to the amount that is not burnt, because then that is more incentive for people to actually hoard, and then but maybe you can for repeat compliance you award people more, you reward for repeat compliance. So for example, 3 years you've not burnt, so you'll get more money, that kind. But again, the problem here is, how do you judge whether that person has not burned that residue or not? Because you will have someone to be there to see
someone
this.
has to monitor. That involves massive amounts of state capacity that can of course result in some form of rent seeking, and we know all of the actual practical problems of implementing a solution such as this. So that's I think the main problems with how it would work out. You could of course change it slightly and make this more like, this is a classic, again, public finance dilemma, right? You could give a subsidy to a person in the hope that they'll behave in a particular way. In essence, you give subsidy to the poor with the hope that they will send the children to school, but that money could as well be used for, drinking or gambling. We don't know, right? How do you ensure that the money that you've given to a particular family is used for a particular purpose?
Right.
So the solution in public finance is that you use something called a voucher, right? So you make sure that money can't be used anywhere else. So here in this sense, the government of Delhi could in fact give a voucher for stubble burning services. In essence, it can't be used for anything else. And basically the farmer gives a call to a particular company that Delhi sets up, and that company will come and clear out the farm for you free of cost. Right? And so basically the farmer still massively benefits from this, because if someone is clearing your land for free and you don't have to pay, it actually works for them even better than stubble burning. So that acts as an incentive. So that's one possible solution that it can be done. I mean, again, practicality is a separate matter. We'll discuss that some other day, but at least this is a theoretical solution to this problem.
Right. So that services could be, let's say, those machines which do all this. So someone will have to establish this company, and it can be a market solution, right? No, the government doesn't need to do
this can be a pure market-led solution.
Yeah, but if those property rights are well defined, then such a market can arise on itself. So a company might spring up which actually offers the services because it knows that government is going to give vouchers, and so that the main insight of Kotasthane solution is that the government doesn't need to regulate and solve all these things on its own. If it is able to identify this property rights, then markets will emerge on their own to solve this.
And the incentives get aligned in such a way that it is in the interests of everyone to actually follow some of these.
Correct. So your compliance problem itself sort of vanishes away or comes to a much lower level. Okay.
That's in essence the Kotasthane solutions bit. Yes, there could be practical difficulties in implementing some of this, but at least this is a new way of thinking about this problem. The only other solution which involves the heavy hand of the government, like we spoke about the taxes and so on, is in essence you create this kind of, it's a federal solution. So the union government of India will play a heavy hand and basically force Punjab and Haryana to stop doing this or something. But that's, or you set up a tribunal, you set up something else. There's like a third-party mediation or arbiter, and you can do all of those things. But that involves the union government in a sense.
No, but I don't think it's a conceptually different thing. Either they are going to do a ban. I don't care whether the ban is done by union government or
Exactly.
And if it is not a ban and it's a tribunal, that tribunal is effectively doing this bargaining function.
Precisely.
Right? So,
it's still a third-party this thing. So
means can be different, but conceptually it's not a category of in itself. Okay. Now, I will disagree with you, and I'll say that Kotasthane solution is not the right solution for this because it's not attacking the root problem. Okay, and this insight comes from Ashok Gulati, is a famous agricultural economist, and I was reading some of the things for this episode, and I found out that the actual problem for all this is MSPs. MSPs for paddy, and if you stop those MSPs for paddy, or you give MSPs to all the crops that are there, maybe because removing MSP is currently difficult, that will itself solve.
Fantastic. Elaborate on this,
Yeah.
because I'm always in favor of removing MSP.
Yeah.
But if you give me one more solid reason as to why we should do that, I'll be all in favor for it.
So let's trace this from the problem and go back to the root cause of it. Okay. So first of all, why does this? Why is air pollution caused by this stubble burning? Because in a concentrated fashion, all the people are burning that paddy field, which is a kharif crop, in a very short period of time. Everyone is doing that just before November. Why?
Right.
Because
So if there were 1,000 farmers and they were burning on 365 different days spread over the year, you're saying that it wouldn't be a problem at all.
Yeah, exactly.
It's because everyone's doing it at the same time.
Yes, right. So not just maybe even if it is spread in 2 months, over 2 months, but it is happening in a very short period.
Right.
Now, why is that happening? Because first reason is they need to prepare for wheat. Okay, the first week of November. Okay, they need to, this is the rabi crop, so they need to plant that. So before November 1, they need to get rid of the previous harvest and all that, okay, which is the kharif crop. Okay, so that is one. Now you can ask, what's the problem? They could have done this in September, October, August. Why can't they do it during that time? But that is not possible. Why is that? Because all of these, this is called a cropping season. So they have to practice something called a delayed sowing. Basically, they can only plant paddy after June.
Okay.
After June 15. The date keeps getting changed, but that is what it happens. Now you will ask, why is that?
Yeah.
Now that happens because in Punjab, for example, there is a law called Punjab Preservation of Subsoil Water Act. It was enacted in 2009, which, believe it or not, prohibits paddy transplantation before June 15th, or the day is decided every year. Now,
wow. Okay.
And if you violate that, the government can destroy your nursery, the seeds and all that. And if you are a repeat offender, they can disconnect your power supply.
That's serious. Okay. But why is this June 15 the magical date? Why can't I do it on, I don't know, May?
Yeah. So first, before that, so this happens. What happens is everyone is planting after June 15th, which means they all have to burn it just before November 1st.
Right.
And all of them happen to do this in a very short time in a concentrated manner. Now coming to your question, right? Why did this come into place? Because earlier people were planting in a more dispersed manner, okay?
Right.
They were planting in April, they were planting in March or whatever, right? Now the problem with that was that the water consumption during those months is a lot more, because it's summer, and North India summer, you can imagine, right? So for example, there are numbers that if you plant paddy in April, it takes around 4,500 liters per hectare.
Okay.
Whereas if you do the same thing in June, it takes around 3,000 liters per hectare.
Wow.
There's a significant difference.
That's a significant difference, yes.
So basically what happened is water table started going down. It started hitting everyone. So the government said that an intelligent way to solve this problem is to prohibit them from planting earlier, and everyone does it now after June 15th.
Right. Okay. And just to remind everyone who's listening, is that paddy is an extremely water intensive crop.
Yeah.
Right? As against, let's say, whatever millets and so on, paddy is one of the more water intensive crops there is out there.
Yeah. Now come to the more fundamental cause of this. Why is paddy being grown there in the first place? Right? Because water is clearly not a problem there now.
Yeah.
So why is paddy being grown there? Historically, wheat and grams and other things were. Now paddy is grown there because first, actually this was this PL 480, and we started with the Green Revolution now.
Yeah.
But why does it continue to be grown there? That is because of MSPs. Now, that is the only reason why everyone wants to grow paddy, irrespective of the water condition, because you are guaranteed a good return from the government.
Right.
So that's why everyone is growing paddy. So this root cause of this is MSPs to paddy, right? So maybe one way to do this is remove paddy's MSPs, gradually. You can't do it suddenly, so you reduce it every year. Second solution would be intermediate. Maybe you provide MSP for all crops. At least that way they'll grow corn instead of paddy, and that
a basic level of MSP.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
not at the insane level. I mean that again.
But the level should be the same. Okay,
Yeah.
it can't be 500 rupees for rice and this.
Of course,
Yeah.
of course.
But if you provide at the same level, that would mean people will not grow this particular plant, which takes so many months and then suddenly needs to be burnt extensively. So corn, for example, causes less crop residue, for example. So that could be done.
Right. Okay.
Right. So I am saying attack the root cause, which in case is this MSP.
Right. I'm completely in agreement. I think MSP as a whole across India, we've seen that it has completely distorted incentives, and you have multiple such instances, right?
Yeah.
Where in the most drought-prone area, you've got MSP, and you've got people who are growing sugarcane and rice and so on. It distorts incentives. We see that, but this is a very interesting twist that MSP is again at the root cause of the entire even pollution in Delhi, which I don't think many people would have even imagined that to be the case.
Yeah, that's a powerful insight, right? And another unintended cause of something which a lot of people think is a great thing to do, right? Yeah. Okay.
Fantastic. I think that's all we have for today. We've at least explored 5 or 6 different, or at least 3 different types of solutions to this particular problem, and a lot of times in India, as I think one of our colleagues, Narayan Ramachandran, always says, the answer would probably lie in all of the above. You need to do a bit of everything, reduce MSP in the short term at least, reduce MSP of rice to a particular level, which is probably more in tune with other crops which don't probably consume as much water, which don't have as dire effects in terms of pollution. You also probably need to start taxing for water consumption, electricity, all of that, which again changes the incentive. You need to probably do some form of causation solution, because when you do all of this, there will be losers. So you need to compensate them in some sense. So in the short term, at least, you probably need to do all of this. In the longer term, I tend to agree with you that you have to attack the root cause of it.
Okay. So on that, we'll end this episode. Thank you.
Thanks.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST. or our website takshashila.org.in.
How many times have you caught yourself Googling stuff on health and wondering if it's the right information? How many times have you heard different health experts give opposing views, which has only left you confused? There are rising cases of cancer, heart, diabetes, stress, and autoimmune diseases. Meet the patients and the experts who paved the path of true healing. Join me, Rachna Chachi, cancer nutrition coach and nutritional therapist on Heal and Hearty. I take you through my own journey of recovery from an incurable disease and the journey of so many others who healed only via nutrition and holistic healing. Find the answers you seek for what's good for your health and what's good for your soul. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com. Don't forget your date with good health.
Janice, what do you think couples did before TV was invented?
I don't know, go for walks on the beach, long drives, fancy dinners, have more sex maybe?
But what did we do when we decided to move in together? We debated between the Chromecast and the Fire Stick.
We gave up on sleeping early so we could stay up watching true crime shows.
We got ourselves 3 cat babies.
And basically became the cutest couch potatoes around.
Okay then.
In case you guys still haven't got it, we are a TV crazy, Netflix loving, binge watching Mr. and Mrs.
I'm Anirudh Kuha.
I'm Janice Sequeira.
And if like us, you snort TV for breakfast, lunch and dinner, this is the podcast for you.
Tune in every Thursday on the IVM Podcast app or wherever it is that you get your podcast from. This is
Mr.
and Mrs.
Binge Watch.